Hi, welcome back to History to Sleep To. Good to have you here. Listen, one small thing before the story. The room you're in, is it a touch warm? Cooler tends to help. Somewhere around 18 Celsius, 65 Fahrenheit. If you're a little warm right now, just kick a foot out from under the covers. That usually does it. Right. Tonight then. Hospital corridor near midnight in February 1855. The corridor is 4 miles long. It isn't really a corridor. It's 4 sides of a barrack square on a hill above the Bosphorus in a town the British have started calling Scutari, which is the old name for the suburb of Constantinople, just across the water from the main city. The barracks was built by the Turkish army to house cavalry. The British army has borrowed it. For the duration of a war it didn't expect to take this long, and has filled it instead with men. The men lie on camp beds laid end to end along the inside of the 4 corridors. Roughly 2,000 of them on any given night that winter. Some are dying of typhus. Some are dying of cholera. Some are dying of dysentery or frostbite, or the long, slow infection that follows a sabre wound that has been packed with the wrong kind of cloth. It is the worst military hospital in the British Empire. Outside, the wind is coming off the Sea of Marmara. It is February, and the wind is cold, and the wooden shutters on the corridor windows do not properly close. Inside, the corridor smells of carbolic and lye and unwashed wool, of cooked oats from the kitchens 2 floors down, and of the small tin oil stoves that are the only heat between the camp beds. Most of the men are asleep. A few are not. And somewhere along the 4 corridors, moving slowly, in a plain black dress, holding a small brass lamp with a folding tin shade, there is a woman. She is 34 years old. The lamp is Turkish. She has been on her feet since 7 this morning. This is not a medical round. The doctors have already done theirs hours ago and have gone to their quarters to sleep. She is checking, not for emergencies. She is checking that the men are still there, that they haven't, in the night, died alone. Her name is Florence Nightingale. We're going to spend a little over an hour with her. Settle in. To understand how she got here, and why this winter is the only year of her life she'll ever spend on a hospital ward, we have to go back about 35 years to a villa on a hillside above the city of Florence in Italy. It's the 12th of May, 1820. Her parents, William and Frances Nightingale, are wealthy English Unitarians on what is meant to be a 2-year honeymoon tour of the continent, which has now stretched into a 3-year tour. partly because Francis has had two daughters in the middle of it. The villa is called the Villa Col Ombieur. It sits on the hill of Bellosguardo, just south of the city, with a view across the rooftops and the river Arno to the dome of the cathedral. The older sister, born the year before in Naples, has been named Par then OP, after the Greek name for that city. The new daughter is named Florence, after the city she is born in. It is not a common name in England in 1820. It will, by the time she dies, be one of the most common names in the English-speaking world. The family returned to England the following year. William Nightingale has inherited from a great-uncle 2 estates, a large country house called Embley Park in Hampshire, and a smaller stone house called Lea Hurst in Derbyshire. The family will spend summers at Lea Hurst, winters at Embley, and a few weeks a year in a rented house in London for the season. Both girls are tutored at home, mostly by their father, who has read Greek at Cambridge and considers a daughter's mind no less worth feeding than a son's. By the time Florence is 12, she is reading Homer in Greek, Cicero in Latin, the histories in French and German and Italian. By the time she is 14, her father is teaching her mathematics, algebra, geometry, the beginnings of statistics, and noting in his diary that she has a particular ease with numbers that her sister does not. She is, by all accounts, a serious child, quiet at the dinner table, long walks alone in the gardens at Embley, a small notebook always in the pocket of her dress. The gardens at Embley Park are large, about 30 acres, laid out in the 18th century, with a long avenue of cedars running east from the house, a small artificial lake at the bottom of the slope, and a walled kitchen garden against the south wall, where her mother grows peaches under glass. She walks the avenue most afternoons. The notebook in her pocket has, on its first page, a list of every plant in the kitchen garden, in Latin, with the date she first identified it. And on the 7th of February, 1837, she is 16 years old, walking in the gardens at Embley in the late afternoon, and something happens that will determine the next 73 years of her life. She records it that evening in her diary, 5 sentences. She writes that God has spoken to her, that she has been called to his service. She doesn't, at 16, know what the service is. It will take her another 16 years to find out. 16 years is a long stall. Most of it she spends doing what wealthy young English women of her class are expected to do: going to balls, paying calls, sitting for portraits, refusing offers of marriage from suitable young men her parents have arranged for her to meet. There are, by the count of her later biographer, at least 3 serious proposals between 1837 and 1849. The third is from a man called Richard Monckton Milnes, a poet, a politician, a friend of the family, whom she likes and who waits, by all accounts, for 9 years before she finally turns him down. She writes him a long letter in 1849, explaining her refusal. She writes that she could not, in good conscience, marry him, because marriage would require her to give up the only thing she has ever felt she was for. She doesn't say what that thing is. Privately, she has begun to think it might be nursing. In 1849, in England, nursing is not a profession. It is something poor women do for very little money, in dirty wards, often drunk. The women who do it are, by general agreement, beneath the notice of the kind of family the Nightingales are. Her mother, Frances, makes this very clear. Her sister, Parthenope, makes it clearer. Parthenope, by all accounts, has a small breakdown each time Florence brings the subject up. The doctors are called. Florence is asked to drop it. She drops it. She picks it up again the following year. She drops it again. She fills the years with mathematics. She fills them with travel. Rome with the Bracebridges, Athens with the Bracebridges, Egypt with the Bracebridges, where she spends 3 months on a hired boat going slowly up the Nile, reading travel writers and writing long letters home. And in the summer of 1850, on the way home from Egypt, she persuades the Bracebridges to take a detour through Germany to a small Protestant hospital in a village on the Rhine, run by a Lutheran pastor called Theodor Fliedner. The village is called Kaiserswerth. The hospital is called the Deaconess Institute. It is the first place in Europe where women are being trained, formally, as nurses. She spends 2 weeks there, in 1850, looking at the wards. She comes home, by all accounts, restless. The following year, in the summer of 1851, she finally tells her parents she's going back. Not to look, to train. Frances refuses. William, in the end, agrees, quietly, against his wife. Florence travels to Kaiserswerth in July of that year and spends 3 months as one of the trainee deaconesses, sleeping in a dormitory, eating at a common table, working the morning and evening shifts on the women's ward. The day begins at 5 with the prayer bell. The trainees wear plain grey cotton dresses with a white apron. They eat in silence. Bread and broth at breakfast. Soup and potatoes at midday. Bread and broth again at 6. The ward shifts run 4 hours each, with an hour in the middle to study anatomy from a single shared textbook the pastor keeps in his office. It is, by her own later account, the happiest 3 months of her life to that point. She is 31 years old. She comes home in October. Her mother won't speak to her for the rest of the year. Her sister has another breakdown. She waits another 2 years. In August 1853, with her father's quiet help, she takes her first paid post. superintendent of a small hospital in Harley Street, London, called the Institute for the Care of Sick Gentlewomen in Distressed Circumstances. She is 33. The hospital has 27 beds. The patients are, by and large, the unmarried daughters of clergymen who have fallen on hard times. Within a month of arriving, she has reorganized the kitchens, installed hot water on every floor, and negotiated with the trustees for a hand-cranked lift to get the patients between the wards without carrying them up the stairs. By the end of the first year, she is, by all accounts, almost professionally bored. And then, in October 1854, a letter arrives for her at Harley Street from a man called Sidney Herbert. Sidney Herbert is an old family friend. He has been a guest at Embley. He has met her in drawing rooms in London for 10 years. He is, in the current Aberdeen government, the Secretary at War. The war is in the Crimea. Britain, France, and the Ottoman Empire are 6 months into a war against Russia, fought largely on a peninsula on the north coast of the Black Sea, around the Russian naval base at Sevastopol. The British Army has roughly 30,000 men in the field. They are besieging the city. The siege will take a year, and the wounded are being sent by ship across the Black Sea, through the Bosphorus, to the barracks at Scutari, where they are dying at a rate of 10 to 1 of disease, not wounds. The Times has a correspondent at Scutari. His name is William Howard Russell, and he has been writing dispatches all autumn that describe, in plain English, the state of the wards. The dispatches are read at breakfast in every middle-class English household with a Times subscription, including, Sidney Herbert reasonably assumes, the household of Florence Nightingale. Sidney Herbert's letter, by his own later account, takes him 3 drafts to write. He posts it on the 15th of October, 1854. It asks Florence to take a small party of nurses to Scutari with full government funding and to do whatever she can. What he doesn't know, when he writes the letter, is that Florence has, on her own initiative, already drafted a letter to him on the same day, offering the same thing. The 2 letters cross in the post. She accepts on the 17th. She has, by the 18th, started recruiting nurses. The advertisements go out the same week. Women are interviewed at her father's London house in South Street, and the great majority are turned away. By her own later account, what she wants is sober women, practical women, women who will not flinch on a ward. She ends up, by the 20th of October, with 38. 24 are nuns from various Catholic and Anglican orders, including 10 Irish Sisters of Mercy under a Reverend Mother Bridgman, who will, in time, become Florence's quiet enemy on the wards. 14 are professional nurses recruited from London hospitals. They leave London on the 21st of October, 1854. Florence in a plain black dress, a small leather travelling case in one hand, a copy of the New Testament in the other. The journey takes 2 weeks. London to Boulogne by steamer, Boulogne to Paris by train, Paris to Marseille by train, Marseille to Malta by steamer, Malta to Constantinople by steamer, and from Constantinople, on the 4th of November, a small boat across the strait to the Scutari landing. The strait, that morning, is calm. The small boat is rowed across by 2 Turkish boatmen who do not speak English and who have been told, by gestures, where to deliver the party. The boat is wooden, painted blue, and smells faintly of fish. They land on a small stone jetty at the foot of the barracks hill. The barracks itself sits at the top, 4 stories high, painted yellow, with a Turkish flag still flying over the gate from before the British took the building. They walk up the hill in their grey woolen travelling cloaks, in a single line, behind a soldier with a lantern, in the early afternoon of the 4th of November, 1854. The Barrack Hospital, when they arrive, has just received a new shipment of wounded from the Battle of Balaclava and the Battle of Inkerman. There are roughly 2,400 men in the corridors. The doctors are overwhelmed. There is no clean linen. There are no washing tubs. There are 6 chamber pots for the whole hospital. The drains under the building are blocked with the corpses of 2 dead horses and the long buried contents of a Turkish cesspit. Nobody yet has worked out that the drains are why the men are dying. Florence Nightingale stands in the courtyard of the Barrack Hospital at the end of the first week of November, 1854, in her plain black dress, and looks at the building and decides what she will do first. She starts with the kitchens. Within a fortnight, she has brought in cooks, clean linen paid for out of a fund the Times has raised by public subscription, and a steady supply from England of soap, arrowroot, and proper invalid food, beef tea, port wine, biscuits, jam. The drains come next. They are dug out by Turkish labourers in the second week of November. The smell, by all accounts, is hard to describe. Then the wards themselves, whitewashed, the windows unblocked, a small laundry organised in an outbuilding behind the kitchens, with 5 large copper boilers and a rotation of soldiers' wives hired by the day. And underneath all of it, the letters. By her own count, she writes 14 a day, to the Army Medical Service, to the Purveyor in London, to the Treasury, to the Ambassador in Constantinople. She sleeps 4 hours a night on a small iron bed in a converted storeroom she shares with one of the nuns. And once a night, after the doctors have done their rounds and the wards have settled into the small quiet of men who are mostly asleep, she takes the small brass lamp with the folding tin shade and she walks the corridors. She walks slowly. She stops, sometimes to speak to a man who is awake. She writes letters home for the men who cannot write, to wives, to mothers, to a young woman in Manchester whose husband, a corporal in the 63rd Foot, has died of cholera on a camp bed in the 3rd corridor of the South Wing. She holds the hands of the men who are dying. She writes, in a journal she keeps for herself, that she does not believe death should happen alone in a corridor. The patrol takes, by the timings of the orderlies, somewhere between 4 and 6 hours. The corridors are gaslit at the corners. In between, the lamp she carries is the only light. An orderly walks ahead of her in the longest stretches with a second lamp to check the floor for spilt water. Another walks behind with a small folding stool in case she wishes to sit beside a man for a few minutes. She rarely does. She is, by her own count, on the ward 17 hours a day. The men, when they wake, are not always sure whether she is real. Several write home, by the hand of the orderly who walks behind her, that they have been visited in the night by an angel with a Turkish lamp. The letters arrive in England in February. In February 1855, William Howard Russell of the Times writes the article that fixes her in the public mind for the rest of her life and beyond. Russell is by then 34 years old himself, Irish, Trinity College, Dublin, a former barrister who has reinvented himself as a war correspondent because the law bored him. He has been at Scutari since November. He has written, by his own count, 31 dispatches from the wards, of which the editor in London has printed 28. The piece he files in February runs to about 900 words. The Times prints it on the 8th, on page 4, under the small headline, "The Times Hospital Fund." He calls her, in the article, the lady with the lamp. He writes that when the medical officers have gone to bed and silence and darkness have settled down upon the miles of prostrate sick, she may be observed alone, with a little lamp in her hand, making her solitary rounds. The article is read at breakfast tables across England in March of that year. Within a fortnight, the name Florence has begun appearing on birth certificates at a rate it has never appeared at before. By the time she dies, in 1910, there will be more Florences in England than there have been in any decade of any previous century, most of them named for her. None of them named for the city. Meanwhile, at Scutari, she keeps working. By the spring of 1855, the death rate at the Barrack Hospital has fallen from the 42% in February to 2% in May. The drains are open. The wards are clean. The kitchens run on a fixed schedule. The men are fed. She has, by any sensible measure, just performed the largest public health intervention in the history of the British Army to that date. For the rest of her life, she will refuse to take credit for the drop in mortality. Instead, the credit goes to a small commission of 3 engineers, sent out from London in March, who arrive after her, work alongside her, and unblock the rest of the drains. Privately, by the evidence of her own letters, she is certain it was the food, the linen, and the clean water. But she also knows by then that an army cares more about engineers than about kitchens. She stays at Scutari for almost 2 years. Twice that year she crosses the Black Sea to visit the regimental hospitals at the front, in the Crimea itself, in May, and again in September. On the September visit, she catches what the army doctors call Crimean fever, which is probably what we now call brucellosis. It nearly kills her. She refuses to be sent home. The army doctors carry her back to Scutari on a stretcher, and through the autumn she recovers slowly and returns to work as soon as she can stand. She will never fully recover. The war ends by treaty in March 1856. The last of the wounded leaves Scutari in July. Florence sails for home, alone, under the name Mrs. Smith, because she has heard there are crowds waiting for her at every port between Marseille and London, and she will not be photographed, and she will not give a speech. She arrives at Lea Hurst in Derbyshire on the morning of the 7th of August, 1856, on a country train from Derby Station. Her mother and her sister meet her at the door. Her father is in the library. She walks past them all and goes upstairs to her room and closes the door. She is 36 years old. She has been away for 2 years. She has become, in that time, the most famous woman in England after the Queen. By her own private description, she is ill, exhausted, and angry. The anger is the part that will outlast the exhaustion. Within 2 years, she has collapsed. From 1858 onwards, Florence Nightingale will spend almost the whole of the rest of her life in a single room, in a small house on South Street in Mayfair, London. The room is on the first floor. The bed is by the window. The window looks out onto a quiet brick wall. The room is, by any sensible measure, small, about 15 feet by 12. The walls are papered in a pale blue floral. The bed is iron-framed, single, with a plain white cotton coverlet she has had made to a specification she gave the upholsterer in 1860. There is a small writing desk on a wheeled trolley her father has had made for her, so that the desk can be pushed across the bed and locked into place. There is a low bookcase by the wall opposite the window, filled with army medical reports, Indian sanitation papers, and 3 editions of her own notes on nursing. There is a small cat, at various points over the years. Several small cats, mostly Persian, all called something like Topsy or Bismarck, asleep on the foot of the bed. On the wall opposite the bed, there is a single frame photograph. An army surgeon called John Sutherland, her closest working colleague for 43 years, taken in 1860 in a London studio. Sutherland visits her every Tuesday and Friday afternoon for those 43 years. They argue about ventilation. They argue about drains. He outlives Sidney Herbert, who dies in 1861 of overwork on the Royal Commission, by 30 years. She will, from this room, run the largest one-woman policy operation of the Victorian century. She receives ministers. She receives generals. She receives the Viceroy of India. When he passes through London, she receives the Secretary of State for War, who comes, by all accounts, twice a month, by appointment at 3 in the afternoon, and sits in a chair beside the bed. And mostly, she writes letters. By the count of her later biographer, about 13,000 of them between 1858 and 1900. Some are short, many are not. The longest, on the sanitation of the Bombay Presidency, runs to 830 handwritten pages. There are reports, too, to the Royal Commission on the Health of the British Army, a commission she has, by lobbying Sidney Herbert relentlessly through 1857, persuaded the government to set up. The Commission's first report, in 1858, runs to 1,000 pages. Half of it is hers. And the report contains, on page 19, a small coloured diagram of her own invention. The diagram is a circle divided into 12 wedges, one for each month of the Crimean year. Each wedge is shaded in 3 colours, one for deaths from wounds, one for deaths from preventable disease, and one for deaths from other causes. The wedges for disease are enormous. The wedges for wounds are small. She calls it a coxcomb. Statisticians, later, will call it a polar area diagram. Schoolchildren, later still, will call it the Nightingale Rose. It is the first chart in the history of British government published specifically to change a minister's mind. It is, by general scholarly agreement, the first time anyone has used a picture, instead of a column of numbers, to argue a public health case. It works. The army reforms. The sanitary engineers go everywhere. Meanwhile, also from the bed, she has begun a second project. In 1860, the Nightingale Fund, a public subscription raised in her honour in 1855 and never spent, opens a small training school for nurses at St. Thomas's Hospital in London. The school has 15 pupils. The course is 1 year. The discipline is, by all accounts, exacting. She doesn't teach at it. She is, by then, too ill to leave her bed. She corresponds with the matron, a woman called Sarah Wardroper, lent from St. Thomas's, 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes daily, for 37 years. The school's graduates fan out across the English-speaking world. They run hospitals in Sydney. They run hospitals in Cape Town. They run a small hospital ship up the Yangtze River in 1888. They open the first formal nursing school in the United States at Bellevue Hospital in New York in 1873. And in the same year, 1859, she publishes a small book. It is 136 pages long. It costs 2 shillings. It is called Notes on Nursing, and it is meant, by her own preface, for the woman of the house, for any wife or mother or sister or servant who finds herself suddenly in charge of a sick person. The book is published by Harrison and Sons of Pall Mall. The first edition has a plain cloth cover, the title on the spine in small gold lettering, and on the title page a short note from the author that no one should imagine these are anything more than hints. They are not, she writes, a manual. They are not, she writes, even instruction. They are the notes of one nurse, written down. It sells 15,000 copies in the first month. It will sell, in various editions, in the millions over the next century. It is still in print. Its central argument is simple. Nursing is not, it has never been, the dispensing of medicine. Nursing is the management of the environment in which the patient is trying to heal. Air, light, warmth, quiet, clean water, clean linen, food at the right hour, a view from the window, someone in the room with you at night. These are, she writes, the things a nurse provides. The rest, she writes, is mostly waiting. She works from the bed at South Street for another 42 years. Most of it is India. For 40 of those 42 years, she advises the British government by post on the sanitation of the subcontinent. She never travels to India. She becomes, by long-distance correspondence with successive viceroys, the most influential single voice on the public health of the subcontinent in the second half of the 19th century. There are 8 viceroys between 1860 and 1900. She corresponds in detail with all of them. Lord Canning, Lord Elgin, Sir John Lawrence, Lord Mayo, Lord Northbrook, Lord Lytton, Lord Ripon, Lord Dufferin. The Mayo file alone, in her papers, runs to over 700 letters. The work is small and concrete. Drainage in army cantonments. Water supply in the villages of Bengal. The proper height of a barrack window. The hours at which a hospital ward should be aired. The kind of soap to be used on the wards in Calcutta in the wet season. Closer to home, the same patient method. There is correspondence on the sanitation of workhouses in Liverpool, on the design of hospitals in Berlin, in Sydney, in Montreal. There is a long exchange with Harriet Beecher Stowe about hospital ships for the Union Army in the American Civil War. And late in life, by then she is in her 70s, a brief correspondence with a young Indian lawyer called Mohandas Gandhi about village hygiene in Gujarat. Honours come, and she refuses most of them. In 1883, Queen Victoria offers the Royal Red Cross. She accepts that one. In 1907, King Edward offers the Order of Merit. She accepts that one too, although she is by then 93 and not entirely sure what is going on. She is the first woman to receive the Order of Merit. And she keeps writing. She keeps writing letters. She keeps writing through the 1860s, the 1870s, the 1880s, the 1890s. She keeps writing into the new century. She keeps writing until her eyes begin to fail in 1901, and even then she dictates. Her last letter, dated April 1906, is to the senior matron of the Nightingale School on the subject of the laundry arrangements at St. Thomas's. It runs to 4 sides. She is then 86 years old. She has been working from the bed for 48 years. She has, by her own quiet preference, not been photographed since 1856. On the morning of the 13th of August, 1910, the housekeeper goes upstairs at South Street with a cup of tea and finds her, in her sleep, in the bed by the window. She has died quietly some time in the night. She is 90 years old. The Times offers a Westminster Abbey funeral. Her family, on her written instructions, refuses. She is buried instead in the small parish churchyard at East Wellow, in Hampshire, the village nearest to Embley Park, beside her parents and her sister. Her gravestone reads, in her own instruction, only her initials and the dates. F.N., born 1820, died 1910. The funeral itself, at East Wellow on the 20th of August, is small. 6 retired sergeants from the Crimea, by their own quiet arrangement, carry the coffin from the lich gate to the grave. They are all in their 70s. They have travelled between them, from Newcastle, from Plymouth, from Liverpool, and from a small farm outside Bridgewater. By her own written instruction, no monument. She has, of course, several. The Nightingale Training School at St. Thomas's, founded in 1860, is now part of King's College London. It still trains nurses. The line is unbroken. The polar area diagram she invented for the 1858 Royal Commission is in every introductory textbook of statistics published in the English-speaking world. School children learn to draw the Nightingale rose. Most of them do not know who she was. Notes on Nursing has sold, by careful estimate, around 8 million copies since 1859. It has been translated into 50 languages. It is still the book that most matrons in most English-speaking nursing schools quietly assume the new pupils have read. And every year, on the 12th of May, the date of her birth in the villa above Florence, the World Health Organization and the International Council of Nurses mark International Nurses Day. Millions of nurses worldwide observe it. The actual lamp, the small brass lamp with the folding tin shade, survives. It is in the Florence Nightingale Museum, on the south bank of the Thames in London, in a low glass case at the end of the long gallery. It is about the size of a teacup. It is older than the United Kingdom of the Nightingale Rose by a quarter of a century. And the long story comes back round. Which brings us, finally, back to a corridor on a hill above the Bosphorus in February 1855. The corridor is 4 miles long. The wind is coming off the Sea of Marmara. The lamp is small, brass, Turkish, with a folding tin shade. The woman holding it is 34 years old. She is in a plain black dress. She walks slowly past men who are mostly asleep and a few who are not. Now the listener knows everything. They know the villa above Florence and the long avenue at Embley. They know the diary entry on the 7th of February and the 16-year stall and the 3 months at Kaiserswerth and the boat across the strait. They know that this is the only year of her life she will ever spend on a ward. She doesn't know that the article in the Times is being typeset this week in a basement off Printing House Square in London, or that by the spring the name on her dress will be the most mentioned name in the English newspapers of the year, or that 54 years from this night she will die in her sleep in a London bedroom, in a bed by a window, with the housekeeper bringing tea up the stairs. She moves on down the corridor. The lamp moves with her. The men do not wake. This has been History to Sleep To. Subscribe for future episodes. They're dropping twice a week. Produced by Stupid Human Limited.